Man, it's great to be back with you guys. I thoroughly enjoy studying the Bible with you.
Great fun.
Yeah, it's an experience that is not only intellectually stimulating, but it opens my mind to see things, and I know this is true for all of us, that we wouldn't see unless we have a conversation with one another. And the same is true all over the world. People should be having spiritual conversations.
Why not?
People should be opening the Bible, not just showing up at church once a week and listening to somebody preach, but getting together as friends and just opening the Bible, reading a passage and saying, hey, what's going on here? Let's study together. And that's what Table Talk is all about. And it's just a privilege. It's an honor.
And it is a joy. It
is.
It literally is fun. It's enjoyable. It doesn't diminish the significance of it or the importance of it to say that it is an enjoyable thing to sit down. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. Psalm 133.
Yeah.
It's pleasant.
It really is.
And a lot of people,
Iron.
a lot of people may not know this, but this is probably the longest amount of time we get to spend together, all four of us together.
That's a good point.
You know,
Yeah,
so we get
'cause
to
we're
catch
here,
up
there, and
between
everywhere.
sessions. We get to talk about the latest apps and gadgets and things we're doing, and then of course we get to catch up on our spiritual journeys.
That's
Yeah.
true.
The things
Great
we've been
point.
learning, etc. A lot of the stuff that we talk about, it's like, well, when did you learn? Really? How long did you know?
Yeah.
I've never
It's
heard that
true.
before. And we're
It's
taking
true.
notes, and we're.
I've got a whole thing full of notes here. I'm loving it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. Another question to get us into the passage.
we go.
That we're gonna be looking at.
1966 GTO, 389 Ford Barrel.
No, I didn't.
The best car.
I didn't ask
Best car.
any question about a car. Here's my question. If right now,
You just guessed it was gonna be about
I was
a car.
running two.
I just want to dig into your psyches. I
like
want to find out
mangoes.
what's going on deep
Mangoes.
inside your soul. Okay, so here it is. If you could right now snap your fingers and uninvent anything, any human invention, innovation,
easy.
technology.
Email.
If you could just
I just uninvented email.
anything,
Really?
you would uninvent email.
Email is
Oh,
the bane
man.
of my existence.
Oh no!
It's just like it just keeps coming, and I'm waging a war against
But I have
it.
things to say to you in emails.
Well,
How
how about this? Remember when you used to get a letter? You get a letter, you'd sit down and you'd
You mean
open
the
it.
letter you got 2 months after the person wrote it?
Yeah, but I don't mind that. A letter.
you would uninvent email, okay? Jeffrey,
Snapchat.
You would-
Snapchat. You don't even know what that is,
I
do
know
you?
what it is.
Why would you
Of course I
uninvent-
know what it is. I tried it once. I
It's
didn't
annoying.
like it.
It's annoying. It bothers me.
But are you on it?
No.
Well, why would you uninvent something that you can just choose to not participate
Because
in?
I'm
Email is-
bothered that other people are on it.
Oh.
James, what would you uninvent? Something, some technology or some device or something. Can't be the can opener. What would you uninvent?
maybe something more important, like an atomic, like
I was thinking that.
The
That's
atomic
the first thing-
bomb?
That's the first thing that came to
Wow.
my brain.
The atomic bomb.
That makes me sound really trivial now.
Well, it makes what I said sound
Snapchat.
really trivial too.
Yeah. I think I would uninvent television. I mean, we're on television doing this.
Whoops.
We're
There's
just,
the irony. There's the
we're
irony.
just using the medium because it exists.
Yeah.
But man, isn't it the omnipresent idol? If you think about it, it's
is.
just everywhere.
That's true.
It's just, and there's so much. Is there 10% of the stuff on television that's worth
No.
watching?
No.
Is there 5%
no.
that's worth watching?
The only television that I see in a year, the only television that I see in terms of like programming where NBC, ABC, Fox, and all of that happens when I go to visit my parents. When I go to visit my parents, the television is on, and it is continually uninterruptedly
It's just background
on.
noise.
And the stuff, and they just leave it on. God bless them. I love my parents very much. But the stuff that's on there, I'm just like, it's either so banal, so,
I just can't even endure the
or
commercials.
it's terrible. Oh, the commercials are an insult to your intelligence.
They are.
Your IQ goes down like 2 points every time you watch one of those commercials.
Something
You
like
just sit
that.
there like,
Yeah, something
So
like
I hear
that.
that. I hear that loud and clear.
I got a visual of you drooling.
I'm sorry. I just
Okay.
had to do that.
Anyways, the reason I asked again, I'm trying to just get us into the text here, but in Revelation 13, we spent our time together last conversation, in verses 1 through 10, identifying the sea beast. When we come to verse 11 and onward, there's another beast that comes up from the earth. The previous one came up out of the sea. We identified that power in history. The second beast comes up out of the earth, out of the land. And that beast, I think we're going to discover in our conversation, I don't know if the right word is invention, but that beast invented something novel, unique, different that really wasn't anywhere in any human system in the world. That beast invented a system of governance that is completely unique in human history. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll see if we can make those connections.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, maybe we should say that the significance of coming up out of the sea, that's the beast, the first
Okay.
beast of Revelation 13.
Read it. We haven't even read it, have we?
Revelation,
start.
Well, no, we
Read
did.
the
Revelation
text.
13:1, and I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Did we not read that text
We read
before?
the text.
We read
You
it.
were about to define
referring to
what it
verse
means
11.
to come
Verse
up out of the
11.
sea.
Out of the sea versus the earth.
So that's the sea, and then the earth is verse 11. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a
So
dragon.
we got a clear comparison here.
Yes.
One
is
comes
coming
out
up
of
in
the
this
sea,
area,
one
one
comes
is
out of the
coming up
earth.
in this area. And the earth, of course, is covered. You're either on land or you're on the sea, right? That's what's available to us here. And sea, we see in Revelation, we see in Daniel, that just as we're dealing with beasts that are symbolic, time periods that are symbolic, horns that are symbolic, this water is symbolic. And it's representing people.
It's chapter 17, verse
Multitudes.
15. Revelation
It
17,
says it
15.
expressly.
Can you read that verse straight up?
Revelation
Because it defines the symbol.
17:15 of Revelation. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations.
We even use that
tongues.
kind of language today. We speak of seeing a sea of people if it's
Right.
a large body of people. So when it says that this beast comes up out of the sea, it means a power, a system, an empire, a nation, whatever, some kind of earthly system arose in a populated area of
Peoples,
the world.
nations,
That's the
multitudes,
first
and
beast.
tongues.
Among nations, among multiple nations that coexist,
So it
butting up
seems-
against one another.
Densely
seems a-
populated area.
It seems a very reasonable inference then that a beast that comes up out of the land is coming up in a different kind of area.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. So if this is a densely populated area, nations and territories that have been occupied for centuries and centuries and centuries, this is a place that is relatively new.
Relatively new.
Seemingly new. It's not as populated. It's not the old world.
Right. It's the new world.
It's the new world.
And it is populated, not as densely populated.
Right.
In fact, it's a large landmass that is brought to view here. But there are peoples there, which we can say something about. But we haven't even identified yet. But we know, don't we, in our previous conversation, that the sea beast of Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, that beast is the Roman Empire papal phase, the medieval church, and we identified that that church reigns for a period of 1,260 years, from 538 to 1798. So then when we come to verse 11, it says, then I saw another beast coming
It's
up out of the
sequential.
earth. It's sequential. So we can expect some kind of power, some kind of system of governance to emerge on the scene of world history
Around
around 1798, and that new system of governance will come up in a relatively unpopulated part of the world. It's obvious with those two identifiers who this land beast is.
But maybe we can just read another section of verse 11, because it says that the beast comes up out of the earth and it has 2 horns like a lamb.
Before we go there, I want to go back to the earth. I just want to give a verification for that. If we go back to Revelation chapter 12,
All right.
we have a verification that the earth is a wilderness.
That's right.
It's an uninhabited area.
Okay.
Comparatively less inhabited.
Yeah, look at this. We talked about this already. The woman who is the church going underground, and in verse 6 she heads out to the wilderness. Again, in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14, the woman heads out into the wilderness, and this time it says, to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness. Okay, that's a desolate area, a less populated area, into her place where she is nourished for a time, times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. There's that time frame again. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as of a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And that talks, in that language, it's talking about, again, waters. But a flood in the Bible actually represents persecuting waters. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, it says in Isaiah 59:19, the Spirit of the Lord will raise up a standard against him. So a flood is used in the Bible to represent persecution, which is coming against the woman. And it says, So verse 15, the dragon's casting out these waters of persecution. But notice this, verse 16, here's the key verse. And the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth.
Swallowed up the persecution?
Yes. Interestingly, during this period of time, God's people found refuge not only in the Alps and the wilderness areas of Europe, but they also found refuge in the continent of America. They actually came over to this continent in the 15th century, in the 16th century, in the 17th, on through the end of this Dark Age period. The woman found refuge in the continent of America, which is identified here as the same place where this beast rises up, the earth. It's
To
the
escape
earth.
persecution.
Yes. They escaped persecution. They found a refuge here in the earth. The earth helps to swallow up that flood of persecution. And then as we move forward, going through the history of the first sea beast, as we move forward, we find another beast, another kingdom, another government, another power, another earthly power rising up out of the same place where the woman found refuge. So it fits perfectly.
That's a great connection.
With the history of prophecy.
Well, in verse, Jeffrey, okay, so then
I was
resume.
just getting to the point in verse 11 where not only does it tell us the coming up, you just positioned us chronologically or in history, and now we're having characteristics of what the thing is like, and it says it has two horns like a lamb, and I think the fascinating thing about that, we run into lamb already in our study of Revelation, but what is it, 28 times, 27, 28, 29 times in the entire book of Revelation that the word lamb comes up. And every single time it's in reference, every single time other than this, is capital L, the translators, is in direct reference to Jesus.
But I think even this is a reference to
It is.
Jesus.
It's an indirect
Yeah,
reference.
I think it is. I think it is. It's
But
an
he's about,
indirect.
you're going to make a distinction, right?
Yeah, well, the distinction I was going to make is that those other references are directly referencing the Lamb Jesus. This reference is John pulling that language,
Descriptive
that characteristic, to describe this beast as lamb-like.
Yeah, that's the key.
So this is not Jesus, right? This
But it's
is
an earthly system.
yeah, this is a Jesus-ish, Christ-ish characteristic of this earthly system.
Yeah.
A
So-
Christian
That's
nation.
right. And horns
In God we
are
trust.
symbols of governmental power, and so these are lamb-like.
Wait, you said that really fast. Back up. You just said that as though it were true.
It is. Just trust me.
So what did you say, though? Slower.
I was talking about the horns. So we've been
Horns
running
are a symbol of.
governmental power. We've
Okay.
been running into beasts that represent powers, and they have horns on them.
By the way, for those who are studying with us, that's in the book of Daniel again.
yes, Daniel chapter
Horns-
7.
Yeah, okay.
Chapter 7. And so, because the horns are symbols of governmental power, and the horns are lamb-like, put the pieces of the puzzle together. We're looking at a power that arises in late 18th century, whose governmental system will have embedded into it Christ-like principles.
This is amazing.
It's
Or
beyond
concepts.
amazing.
Concepts,
The first time I was
philosophies.
exposed to this prophecy, I was probably already a believer of about 2 months. But when I was exposed to this prophecy as a pre-med student at the age of 23, I was like, God is real. I just was like, it just was like solidified. Up to that point, I was already persuaded, giving my life to Christ, studying scripture, but I was like,
Yeah.
can you explain that again? They walked me through the markers. So this is what we're looking for.
Right.
Late 18th century, relatively sparsely populated compared to the old world, helps a woman escape persecution from the Roman power, lamb-like systems of governance, identified as a Christian system.
This is the United States of America.
And you know what blows my mind is that
And it's not a stretch.
we say
It's
that
not a
It's like
stretch. It's
what's
so
really going on
obvious.
here, and your gymnastics with the text, it's like,
But that just rolls off your tongue as if it's so natural. But I think it's fascinating that throughout Christian history, Protestant history, that first beast that we talked about in our last discussion, the consensus is pretty strong, pretty unanimous
Among Protestants.
among Protestants that beast is the medieval church, the Roman state power. But this second beast,
Not so sure.
it's all over
not
the map.
so sure through the centuries, and it wasn't until the mid 1800s, 1851, where a young guy by the name of J.N. Andrews wrote an article as he was looking at the prophecy, as he was studying what previous Protestant, Baptist, and Methodist, and Presbyterian scholars had written, and they were all poking in the direction. They were saying, wait a second, it can't be the papal system because that's the first beast,
Yeah.
but there's some sort of relation here, some sort of passing of the baton, so to speak. And so they were thinking maybe it has something to do with the Protestant version of Christianity. Literally, they were saying that.
So they
And
were onto it.
They were onto it, and then
Yeah.
and then Jane Andrews, 1851, writes an article, and he says, "It's the United States of America," and that's the first time in history
Yeah.
where that rolled off somebody's tongue like it did yours, just so naturally. And I think I like to revisit that to realize how I want the wow factor back. You know, like whoa, that's heavy. That's very heavy.
And here's a very important point with regards to prophecy. We've discussed this before in terms of Daniel's book was sealed. Well, why was it sealed? He didn't have the historical perspective to see Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome.
Yep.
You couldn't have written that the United States was the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13 in 1776.
No, there's no way you could
You couldn't have done it.
comprehended
You just wouldn't have had that. But by the time you get 1851, you've got 1776 is
Yeah.
when the United States declares independence. You're 70-ish years in, and you're looking around, and knowledge is increasing.
Yeah.
To use Daniel's term, you're like, whoa, we're in that period. Now let me throw
They
another.
would have been within a generation.
Within a generation.
Because Jefferson, early 1800s, he's
got
still
it.
alive. So Jane Andrews' writing, connecting the dots, could have been an acquaintance of somebody who was contemporary to Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
You know what's amazing though
It
too
is.
is
Let me just throw out one more identifying mark. Hold
Okay.
on, you've got what you were going to say?
it's the same thing probably. Go
the
ahead.
coming up.
You get that, and I'll get another one.
Okay, so in the text here, Revelation 13:11 says, "I saw another beast coming up." We all think here you got King James. Most of us have New King James. The word "coming up" here is grew up. It's to sprout.
Like a plant.
It's to sprout. So this is not the old world beast, lion, bear, leopard,
devouring
the other.
conquering,
Over the
devouring,
other.
one
Yeah.
taking over the other. This is growth.
It's new.
It's new. It's sprouting. It's almost quietly coming up. Here again, we have yet another identifier. We're not looking for a nation that's going to come and conquer a previously occupied
Babylon, Media,
geographical.
Persia, Greece, Rome.
No, this is coming up, sprouting up. That's mine. What were you going to say?
Well, the other one is in verse 12. It says, "And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast." This is a power that has universal military might. Now, when you look at this in relation to the U.S. in prophecy, you realize that from the beginning, like David said, this power developed gradually and slowly. The United States was fighting for its independence in 1776 and was still struggling with that in 1812.
It was not a world power.
It was not a world power. And
Many people thought it wouldn't even survive.
right, and even into the 19th century, there's this World War II and the bombing of Pearl Harbor, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden now we're living in a time
Yeah.
where this prophecy
It's obvious.
it's obvious.
You know,
It
can
is
I-
so
can
You
obvious.
I
have
go
to have a
back-
power that could have a coercive influence
Yes.
on the earth.
And the
Because
United
that's what the
States,
text
That's what the
says.
text
the
says.
United States has more military bases around the world than any other power, and just insists on having them.
You probably know more about this than I do, Jeffrey, but post-World War II, that was where you have the real rise. Post-World War I into World War II, and then post-World War II, that's where the United States becomes the military monster that it is.
But it was
always competition. Is it England?
There is no competition.
It was the
competition
fall of
now.
communism in 1989, 1990 that allowed the United States to become the sole world
Superpower of the world.
Superpower.
Sole world
Yeah,
superpower.
yeah.
We jumped there.
Which is interesting
I wanted
because
to
the
go
fall
back.
of atheism, just think about that. That's in this prophecy. The deadly wound was healed. The wounds inflicted, the deadly wound is healed. The wound was inflicted by atheism. The wound being healed.
Or by atheist France.
Yeah, the
French
wound in
Revolution.
you're
You're identifying communism as a system representative of atheism.
Yes, suggests
That's a cool point.
the decline
Yeah.
of
That's
that
a cool
power
point.
and the rise of this next
Yeah.
one. Okay.
I was just going to say that in the lamb-like, because we just said, oh, lamb-like, Christian, America, but I wanted to read some of the founding documents really
Please
quick.
do.
Please.
Just to show that when the students identified two horns like a lamb, okay, system of governmental power, but there's two.
Yes.
And they started to think, wait a second, what is the foundation of this United States of America? And they identified two primary principles, right? Republicanism and Protestantism, freedom from a king, freedom from a pope, right? the two primary
Yes.
principles. And in the founding documents, as I was reading this, I'm reading the founding documents trying to identify, do I see anything Christian-ish, Christ-ish here? Anything Jesus would say?
Lamb-like.
Lamb-like. And then let me just read the Declaration of Independence, which I think is just
Incredible.
glorious.
Yeah, it just makes my heart race with excitement, these words.
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, and this is the point that I want to make, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
We have been we've been contrasting through this whole study of Revelation these two powers, these two systems, right? God and Satan. Satan using coercion and brutality and so forth, and Christ using an entirely different approach. And this idea of deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is so lamb-like.
It's so powerful.
That is so lamb-like.
And that's what I meant, by the way, earlier when I said, is there something that this power invented on a governmental level? Is there a new system that is brought to the world as a kind of experiment? And this is precisely it. It's a method of governance that is by the consent of the governed. It is a method of governance that does not involve monarchical power, that doesn't involve papal power.
And so in addition to that, when the Declaration of Independence is drafted and when we finally secede from Britain, there is still something that needs to be settled because this new country can't operate without centralized power, and therefore there needs to be power invested in the central, in the government. And so the Constitution, and what I love about the First Amendment, so now we're in 1791, I'll just read this and you guys can chime in about the lamb-likeness. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Don't you love that?
So that's basically the gospel. That's the great controversy between good and evil, and the principles of the gospel being
Liberty.
articulated. Yeah.
So you could say it this way, that the Declaration of Independence, and the part that you've read anyway, and the Constitution of the United States of America is the gospel of Christ in the form of of governing documents. Now, not in totality, and there's more to the gospel than this, but at the core of the gospel is basically non-coercive love. At the core of the gospel is the God of the universe only desires the service and worship that is born of free hearts that love him based on the worthiness of his character, so that coercion is diametrically opposed to the character of God.
Absolutely.
So this system that is brought to view here, the United States of America, is bringing into the world, it's actually the fruition of what Jesus and the apostles started.
That's right.
Down through history, it's developing, it's going underground, it's resurfacing now. It's resurfacing in the form of a free people that are governed by consent. So we've got to take a break, but when we come back, we'll continue moving through this remarkable passage that points to the United States in Bible prophecy.
Amen.
The Bible is a big book. It's composed of 66 smaller books written by more than 40 different authors. It's easy to get bogged down in all the genealogies, ancient history, and intersecting characters with unpronounceable names. And yet, the Bible is full of rich and powerful truths that all of us need to understand.
Wouldn't you love to have an experienced tour guide take you on a step-by-step journey through some of the most vital and beautiful truths contained in the Bible? Well, now it's here. It's called TruthLink. TruthLink is a groundbreaking new series of easy-to-understand Bible study guides that thousands of people around the world are raving about. Why all the excitement? Because TruthLink systematically unfolds 27 life-transforming biblical topics, but not as a list of dry theological facts. Rather, TruthLink takes you on an engaging biblical expedition demonstrating how every truth of Scripture reveals some facet of God's beautiful character. TruthLink isn't just information. It's a spiritual journey that will radically impact your life. We would really love for you to have these Bible study guides because we know they will be a blessing to you. You can get them by visiting truthlink.org or by calling 541-988-3333.
What we've been discovering here in Revelation 13 is nothing short of astounding. If this passage actually foretold the rise of the United States of America as a system, then what might it also say to us about the future of this power? So if it's telling us, hey, there's going to be this power that's going to arise in human history that's lamb-like in its governing principles, which we identified, does the passage go on and say, but wait a minute, it's not going to be good forever. It's not going to be lamb-like forever. Well, the passage actually says in verse 11, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, but then it says, and spoke like a dragon. Now we know the dragon is traceable to the devil ultimately and to the Roman Empire secondarily, so...
I was going to say that those two images, lamb and dragon, in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the only text in all of Scripture that has that juxtaposition.
Lamb and dragon in the same
In the same
sentence.
verse.
Yeah.
That is...
And it's amazing, really,
Continue.
because it's
amazing.
It's describing the conflict, I think, that this country's gone through from the very beginning. From the very beginning, you've got these principles that are written into our Constitution, you've got these amendments to the Constitution, and then you've got these acts, these manifestations of dragon-like principles that I think the text is telling us are going to get more and more intense, because the verse, that's one verse of many verses that describes this power. So it's going to get more and more intense. But even from the beginning, even from the establishment of this great nation, there were little manifestations, dragon-like manifestations that came out.
Yeah, even in the beginning phases, the fact is that we're all very happy to be a part of a governing system based on the kinds of principles that Jeffrey read to us in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States of America. It's incredible to be a part of a system that is based on freedom. But the fact is that simultaneously there's some spiritual and moral dissonance.
Yes.
Because
Some blind spots.
Blind spots, exactly. You have founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson himself, who penned these incredible words, who
Created equal.
who owned slaves.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Who owned slaves. So we need to understand that this system is based on good principles, and simultaneously there are those who are founding the nation who are violating the very principles that they're articulating because they have blind spots. I guess that would be a kind way to say it.
And not only in terms of slavery, which was a massive blind spot, to put it nicely, but you have the treatment of the indigenous peoples of this land.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're
Horrible.
Absolutely horrific. Broken treaty after broken treaty, and mistreatment after mistreatment, and tragically, this was being done largely, almost entirely, by Protestants.
Yeah.
In other words, these are people that have fled from the flood of the old world, have come to the new world, and they land, but there's still, to use Jeffrey's term, the residue, that sticky residue of the old way of doing things. You think of Luther. Let's just use a simple example here. We're approaching the 500th year anniversary of Luther's protest against the medieval church, right? October 31st, 1517. Here we are, 2016. So we're just on the verge of that 500 year. Luther himself believed in a state church. That's why they are called the magisterial reformers. They believed in a Christian magistrate. The idea, this idea, that you will have a government without a king, the ruled and the rule. No. We don't have peasants and lords. We now have citizens that are governed only by their own consent. And then now we're going to have not only that, but no pope.
Right.
There is no religious authority, whether it's a pope or a Christian magistrate. This was wild. It was called, the language of the day was the American experiment.
Yeah.
Can this work?
Right.
And
Can people self-govern?
the idea was, this is absurd. It was considered absurd. And frankly, it's miraculous. If you go back and look at the history, and I'm not Jeffrey is more the historian when it comes to American history than I am, but it's a miracle, for example, the Revolutionary War, that the United States could have won that war in the way that they did with the Minutemen and all of that.
The resources.
There's
they
a
had.
providence over it.
Yes.
There was a providence over it. Then you get to the emergence of, it wasn't just like some piece, okay, I live in Australia. Australia's a beautiful country. It's roughly the size of the United States of America.
Continental United States.
Yeah, without Alaska. It's roughly the size of the lower 48. But you could not stick 330 million people in Australia.
Right.
No way. That's the population of the United States today. You do not have the resources. When people landed here, there are forests, there are oil fields, there are minerals to be mined. The richness of this country in terms of its natural resources was phenomenal. It's what enabled it to become this global military economic power. If they had found Australia, that would have been circuitous for them to have found Australia. You do not end up with the United States of
No.
America. That's not a knock on Australia.
Its
It's just
own limitations and resources limits its
the middle of
power.
Australia. There's nothing there.
Uninhabitable.
I mean, I've driven it. There is just nothing there. Not these big forests and beautiful mountains and clear flowing rivers, and you don't have it. So when you start to, you see the providence of God all over this, but that doesn't mean, and as Ty was bringing out, that there were not some major oversights and some breaches of the very principles that they themselves
That's right.
advocated, whether it's with slavery, whether it's with even suffrage, women voting. That doesn't come around until, help me out here, you might know, like 1900s, early, Wyoming, I know, the state that I'm from, was the first ever state that allowed the voting of women. But that's late into the game. Then you have the treatment of the native peoples. It's just, they got the principles right, but the application didn't follow immediately.
You know, too, the other thing was even these early students, even in the wars, the early wars, Spanish-American War, when America was becoming an empire,
Yes.
now taking possession of foreign lands,
Colonizing them.
colonizing other
right.
lands like the Philippines.
Yeah.
We fully colonized the Philippines, and so this is so old world mentality being now adopted by the lamb-like beast. So it's a total.
It's a perfect confirmation of the verse. In a
exactly,
sense. It's a
exactly.
perfect- And I don't think that I've ever seen it this way before, because I've always thought, we'll speak like a dragon, we'll speak like a dragon. That's somewhere in the future, that's somewhere in the future. But the verse indicates actually that they could be simultaneous. And that what we're looking at in the future in the following verses is the imbalance. It is the neglect and perhaps the abandonment of the lamb-like principles and the total focus on speaking like a dragon.
That's
However,
interesting. So you're saying they're running simultaneous?
yeah, they're running because when we look at the history,
I think that's
they actually
closer
do
to
run
it.
simultaneously.
I think that's
You see?
closer to it.
Yeah. And then
Yeah,
as we
yeah,
move
yeah.
on, one overbears the other. And it's as if God is saying, I'm going to give an opportunity for these principles to be seen in government just to get a peek and see how they operate and to see what a blessing they are. But then I'm going to go ahead and allow this to return to this dominant prince who's going to make full manifest his character in the end of time, and then we're going to end all this.
So
This
it
dominant
says,
prince, you lost me there.
The prince of this world. The dragon. The
devil.
dragon.
Okay,
Or
got it.
the dragon-like.
Okay.
So when it says in verse 11 that he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, the word spoke is connected with verse 12, the word authority. He exercises authority, which is connected with the word causes. He causes.
that becomes the key
so
phrase.
essentially what's happening here, it's not just speaking in the sense of uttering words. How does a nation speak? Well, a nation speaks in the form of its legislation.
Yes.
So this is essentially saying that the United States of America, founded on principles of republicanism and Protestantism, principles of freedom, of
Liberty.
religion and conscience,
Yes,
liberty,
yes.
that power will simultaneously and ultimately
Yes.
legislate
Well, I like the way you said that.
against
Yeah.
the founding principles of the documents that gave us this American experiment. It's amazing that that's
And we're
in
living,
the Bible.
we're living in
It's
this history.
astonishing.
This isn't Babylon, Medo,
Yeah.
Persia, Greece, Rome. This isn't the Dark Ages. This isn't, some future. We're living right now in this.
Yeah.
We're looking at our history, our recent history, our present history, and we're predicting our future history in the context of Revelation 13, in the context of Bible prophecy.
There is such a feeling of what has been described as American exceptionalism among Protestant Christianity, that God bless America, God has raised up America for purposes. You wonder sometimes what purposes people think that is, but this is a slight side conversation, but some believe that God raised up the United States basically for the express purpose of protecting Israel, like national Israel over there. My point is this: I wish that people who believe in this version of the sort of providential opening, because there's some truth to it.
There is.
There's some truth to it. But it's become a version of American exceptionalism in which there's this giant blind spot, hello, not only to our history, but increasingly to our present.
Oh yeah.
And I'm telling you right now, as an American, this is not a political statement. There are things that we are doing as a country. I say we. There's are things that the nation that I live in, of which I am a citizen, that are happening at a governmental level, political level, that I find absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, you're
Shuddering.
simultaneously
Unacceptable.
You're
Thank you.
simultaneously proud and embarrassed.
And concerned.
Because you're proud of what it's founded on. You're proud of the founding
principles.
principles.
But the application has been...
Would you say you're patriotic?
spotty.
I would say I'm
It depends on what
patriotic
it means.
if
In principle.
patriotic means to the principles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say that your patriotism isn't tested by any candidate or party, though.
No.
You can be a
Great
loyal
point, great
American and reject the political parties that are warring with one another, but be loyal to the principles of the founding documents.
I actually think being loyal to the principles of the founding document necessitates you.
I was hoping you would say that.
Isn't that something?
necessitates you to
That's a
have
good point.
a dissenting voice
That's a
when
good
those
point.
principles are violated.
That's a good point.
Otherwise, you're just, what are you?
And we should say that we are not the only people that are that way. There are lots of people in the United States right now that are raising the red flag
would
of,
hope so.
hey, that whole thing about the Constitution.
Yeah, what about
and
that?
What
Do you
about
still believe
that?
that?
And Jeffrey, again, you would know more about this than I would, but in the context of the interpretation of the Constitution, you have different schools of interpretation, right? So some say, no, it's exactly what they said, and in the same way you have schools of interpretation of Scripture. It's an ancient document. What did they mean, and how are those ancient principles applied today? But at the core of it, the kernel, the nucleus of it, was freedom.
That's right.
Which is what your point about how it's the gospel in a governmental system, non-coercive love, voluntary loyalty
That's right.
to a system, the consent of the governed. And every place where that freedom and that liberty is being impinged upon by the government, like our biggest fear, we have met the enemy. Was that Kennedy?
I don't
Maybe
know.
not. And
We've met the enemy, and it's us.
we are him.
Yeah, that's right.
The greatest threat to America right now, to the principles of America, is America.
Yeah, that's right. We have to take a break, but there's some pretty heavy stuff that continues on. We have coming up here this thing called the image to the beast, and it'll be interesting to talk about
And
that.
the
But
mark of the beast.
Let's just take a break, and we'll come right back.
Truth is not merely a list of theological facts, but rather the revelation of God's beautiful love in Jesus Christ. Truth Link is a series of Bible study guides that magnify God's love as the center of every Bible doctrine. To receive your free copy of Lesson 1, call 877-585-1111 or write to Lightbearers, 37457 Jasper Lowell Road, Jasper, Oregon 97438. Once again, to receive your free copy of Truth Link, Lesson 1, call 877-585-1111 or write to Lightbearers, 37457 Jasper Lowell Road, Jasper, Oregon 97438.
You guys, what we've identified here in Revelation 13, verses 11 and 12 and onward, identifying the United States in Bible prophecy, this is phenomenal. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Once you know this, you can't unknow it. This bears testimony to the inspiration of Scripture. This tells us, wow, if that was written in advance, that gives testimony to the fact that this is an inspired word. This is an inspired document.
Amazingly so.
Yeah, and secondly, it bears testimony to the fact that God is active in human history.
I was just about to say that God is present and relevant, and Scripture's relevant now.
But the thing is this freedom experiment, according to the text, is temporary. It's going to wind down. We can expect, if this passage foretells the United States of America, it's telling us that eventually the principles of freedom will be violated through its legislation system. And this experiment is short-lived. It's not going to go on forever and ever and ever. And we're starting to hear dragon-like rhetoric, aren't we? It's coming through in the political system. It's coming through.
Well, it's getting louder and louder and louder.
Anything that comes from the American political system, would this be an exaggeration? Anything coming from the American political system that encroaches upon freedom is tending in the direction of the dragon-like principles.
Because coercion is the main issue. The main issue is coercion, the eroding of freedom. And why? Because the gospel principle is the principle of freedom.
Now, there's another way the passage says
this. You know the
this.
truth shall set you free.
It says in verse 11 that the Lamb-like power will speak like a dragon. It says it'll exercise authority. It says it will cause those who dwell on the earth.
That's key, cause.
Yeah, to worship the first beast. Now we have to pause and remember, who's the first beast? Well, that's the sea beast. That's the one in chapter 13, verses 1 through 10 that's being dealt with. So essentially, this is saying that the United States of America, which was founded on no king, no pope, that pulled away from papal dominance, will gradually begin to return to papal principles and papal loyalty, right? Isn't that what this is telling us? It will make an image.
It will reflect that same system.
It says in verse, where is it? In verse 14, it says that the beast that comes out of the earth will make an image to the beast. That is, it will institute a governmental system at some point that reflects the way the papacy, the medieval church, governed down through the Dark Ages.
And this is an important point, because sometimes when people read that image to the beast, they think it's going to be some kind of image, like an image that they're going to set up in the plain of Dura, like an image that you work. No, it's a reflection. It's like when you look in the mirror and you see an image of yourself. This power is going to image or reflect the same principles that power has.
And what was it? How did the medieval church govern? It was by a union of church and state.
Which is why it says that it has these two lamb-like horns, but then it speaks like a dragon.
So we can expect the United States of America to join church and state. Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly right.
Repudiate the principles of the Constitution.
Correct. So that these things that Jeffrey read will be in they'll be in print.
Yes.
You know, you can't unwrite history. The ink is dry, but it won't be in practice. You're onto it. That's exactly what I was going to say. Ooh. Well done. So you have verse 12, causes the earth. Verse 14, and deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So this is not just like, hey, we advise you to worship. This is like, do it or else.
This is
you talked about the conquistadors coming to Was it Peru?
Yeah.
Sword, crucifix, do as we
Converter
say
died.
or else.
Yeah.
Cause
Verse
comes up
16,
again in 16.
he causes all, both
So
small
cause,
and great,
cause,
rich and
cause,
poor,
cause.
free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their hand.
Translation, this is foretelling a resurgence of persecution in the New World.
Coercion, yeah.
That's right.
Persecution, coercion.
And again,
Which is mirroring
Which-
what took place with the previous beast.
And it is interesting, because it's in this context that the whole mark of the beast thing comes up. There's a lot of discussion and what is the mark of the beast, and for some it's like a mystical tattoo or some computer chip or something. But it's in this context of coercion by the second beast, the United States, who's now acting, behaving, and looking a whole lot like that first beast.
Yes.
That period through the medieval period, that church through the medieval period, verse 17, and that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark of the beast or the number of his name. Last verse here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding calculate the number of the beast. It is the number of a man. His number is 666.
David, one phrase that you missed there in verse 17 that I
okay.
really wanted to highlight. That's why I noticed
Did I
it.
just skip it?
And no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark of the beast or the name of the beast.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Maybe
the
I missed it.
number
The
of his
name of the
name.
beast speaks to the characteristics of the beast. And why this is important is because what we've outlined here is that the beast is using force. The beast is hypocritical, lamb-like principles, but speaks like a dragon. The beast is filled with deception, miracles, deceiving those. The beast is into control. All of these are principles of the character of the beast. And we can think that we're in the right church, we're in the right denomination, we're believing the right doctrines, the right truths, but if we're developing principles of control and deception and force, if we're developing the characteristics of the beast, we're going to go along with this system.
In any of our relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We are going to go along with this system. Once this system comes together, we're going to go along with the system because we've been developing these principles.
That's the big point.
And what if your whole way of processing reality is based on self-preservation? When it comes down to no man can buy or sell, which is economic pressure,
Yes.
this is economic sanctions, nation to nation, economic boycott within a nation. If there are restrictions on commerce, that's a heavy pressure to be
That's a
placed.
huge pressure.
If self-preservation is the core of your operating system,
Which it is for most people naturally.
including us around this
Us,
table,
yes, all of
unless the
us.
gospel liberates us from it.
And we love not our lives unto the death.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to, man, we got this thing going on.
So if self-preservation is the core of our operating system as human beings,
I like
then
that,
when you
operating
come
system.
when you come under this pressure, you're going to go along
course you
with
are.
the system that preserves you. Who is it that said that if you sacrifice freedom for security, you'll have neither.
You end up with
Yes.
neither.
We need
Yeah.
to download the newest operating system.
Come on now.
Download from
gospel.
heaven,
We
the
got
newest operating system.
He's like spelling it out. Download. I'm up there.
So do you see what I'm saying?
Of course I
see what you're saying.
The point here is really that we need to put in our hearts the principle of non-coercive love in all our relationships.
In all of our relationships, Ty, I've got to tell you something. One of the things that I love that you say, we all have language that becomes ours and we own it and we use it, and it just comes out of our mouths very quickly and easily. There's a phrase that you say with regularity that I absolutely love, and it's relational integrity. Okay, so you say that a lot. What does that mean?
Relational integrity is a phrase that I started using because the word love has been so hijacked in society to mean kind of a shallow, sentimental emotionalism. You know, it's in pop culture. Most songs are
I
love
love
songs.
peanut butter.
I love peanut butter and jelly. I love this woman, but I don't love her anymore because here's another woman, and there's relational violation. But that's all called love. And so I thought, you know what? The word love, what does it mean when the Bible says the word love? Well, when the Bible uses the word love, it means other-centeredness. It means relational integrity. It means I don't violate you to preserve or serve myself. So relational integrity is just my way of describing what the Bible calls love.
So what we're saying here is that these principles, this is not just something that's happening on a national level, a governmental level, a political level. These principles, that's the name of the beast thing that you're talking about, they can infiltrate and infect our own relationships with other people.
Any human being.
We can manipulate a situation. We can be coercive. We can be deceptive. We can tell half-truths. We can, all the while thinking, how can I get the upper hand in this marriage, in this neighborly relationship, in my home?
My business.
That's the way that we do. That's the way that we do life. It's just natural. I just read recently that children learn. This is all over the world. All over the world. I'm reading a book right now called The Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson, and he says many fascinating things. And one of the things he says in there is that in every culture, children learn to say no quicker than yes.
Yeah.
That
I don't love that.
Every culture, that's who we are. We're like, well, no, hey, what you know. There's not a natural affability, cooperation. Hey, can we? It's me, and what you're doing
Polarizing.
something. No,
Yeah.
no. And the whole issue of selfishness. It's a. Somebody talked about Romans 8 a little while back. The carnality, the
human heart is enmity against God. and
against
His law,
God.
yeah.
Romans 8:7.
So really,
if we don't have the gospel, if we don't download the gospel operating system, we will go along with this.
Sure we will.
This
we
is
might
the
even
religion
say
of
right
human
now
nature.
we wouldn't, because ideologically we don't agree with it. But if relationally and emotionally we go along with it, we'll violate our intellectual opinions. We'll to save ourselves.
Are you ready for this?
passion defies logic.
Though all men will deny you.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah. And then he did.
See, he's intellectually saying, I will lay down myself for you,
Yeah.
but when the rubber met the road, it was
That's
like,
right.
yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. That's right.
You know, it's really interesting because when you take this analogy just a little bit further with computers, you don't not only have to keep your computer operating system updated, because you've got fixes,
Okay, here we go.
fixes.
It's going to
You
develop
have a lot of
this.
fixes if you have a PC, not as many if you have an Apple product.
Yeah, but at some point you actually may have to trade out your equipment for another piece of equipment in order to go a little further with the fixes in the operating system that is progressing. In other words, the path of the just is a shining light that shines more and more into the perfect day. And God can only show us so much. And as we've looked at it, just to summarize, as we've looked at Bible prophecies, we've looked at the book of Revelation, we've been on this progression. And we went into this dark period, this dark pit, and we came out of this pit, and then God brought us back to the track of progression, the light of progression. And it's as if we've been trading in these models. You remember when we had our first $5,000 portable computer, black and white, small little thing that weighed about 50
how old
pounds,
are you?
right?
He's really old.
Older than you.
that was ages ago.
We've traded in these models, and it's the same thing with us. We have to look at the scripture, just like when we looked at Revelation 13, we said, you know what? I think those two principles are coexisting from the very beginning. I don't think the dragon-like principles just appear one day. We can actually trace them all the way back. We can actually see, but the lamb-like principles were dominant. They were dominant.
And they're going to become less dominant.
They're going to become less dominant.
Yeah, you lost me on
So
the
the point I'm
computer
making,
thing.
the point I'm making is on the computer.
I think it's a good point. I just want to understand it.
The point I'm making is
that was like the first thing he said.
I'm cleaning out my office, and I have two Macs in there, old Macs.
Oh, you got to give those to me.
They're just sitting there.
Don't throw them away.
There's nothing I can do with those.
You can give them to me.
They're super old.
They'll be worth-
They can't take a new operating system. So when we go back in history, there are certain places in history where we make a transition. We transition out of this mother church. Then we transition out of this Protestant churches, and we transition to this Advent movement. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, I gotcha.
We're making these
Upgrade.
transitions.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, so we're not just downloading, we're also upgrading. We're upgrading. And what I'm saying, just to bring it all to a conclusion, is this.
I got you.
We have for a long time emphasized the idea that the mark of the beast is all about, let's say, a day that we worship. But what we're talking about right now, we're upgrading now. We're downloading some bugs and fixes, and we're realizing, it's about principles. It's about character. It's about the way that we relate to people, especially the people that we're closest to. It's about the principles that make up the character of God and the seal of God, or the principles that make up the name or the character of the beast.
I love all of that. Something that I feel like I need to do just for myself is to go back to Revelation 12, because we didn't really wrap up 13 to 17, but it won't be
But
difficult to do.
17 especially.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the
17
point I want to
especially.
get to is 17, but this will not be difficult to do.
Do it.
Revelation 12:13. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. We've talked about that. That's that's the persecution by the dragon of Christ. Verse 14, not of the dragon by Christ, but of Christ by the dragon. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. We've dealt with that, right? Verse 15, so the serpent spewed water out of its mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. You've dealt with this, James. Verse 16, but the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed the flood which the dragon had spewed out of its mouth. Okay, so we've covered that territory, right?
Right.
But here's what I love, verse 17, which I don't think we've dealt with.
No, we haven't.
The dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. I want to make one point, then I'll let you guys wrap it up. The dragon makes war against the church of God, against the people of God, against the remnant, God's people on earth. And the means by which he makes war are these 2 beasts. That springs us into chapter 13.
Right.
The first beast, which is the medieval church, and the second beast
Good point.
is going to be the United States. And it's this confederacy of the whole world.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point. These two beasts don't just show up and rocket out of nowhere. It's like, hey, the dragon went to make war with God's people, and these are the means by which that war was made. First beast, second beast.
So essentially, what we've discovered in Revelation chapter
Good point, David.
13 is that the sea beast, the first beast, is the medieval church, and it operated by certain principles, governing by certain principles.
right.
The second beast comes into existence and operates by principles of liberty and freedom. But eventually, what we're going to see happen, the Bible is prophesying. It's saying
This is
to
where
us,
it's headed.
Yes.
where it's headed is that the United States of America will at some point abandon the principles of freedom in favor of reconstituting a system of religious coercion like the first beast before it. That's where we've landed.